Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 8th Trust webinar organized by Black Sun and the Working Capital. We'll be starting in about 10 minutes time while we're waiting for participants to log in. For those who don't know me, I'm Wan Chen. I'll be your host and moderator for this evening. We'll be starting the session in about 10 minutes time and we will finish at about 8 p.m. this evening Singapore time. So it'll be a 90-minute session. And we will have 4 speakers with myself as a moderator. So it'll be quite an intense session. And after 5 months, we finally come to the 8th Trust webinar series that we've been running since April of this year. Good morning and good evening once again, everybody. We'll be starting in about 8 minutes time while waiting for the rest of the participants who logged in. This is our 8th and final webinar in the Trust series that we've been running since the 2nd of April of this year. And for those who have missed the first 7 webinars, don't worry, they are available for replay and all the slides are also available. I'll be sharing with you the QR code for you to scan and access the link. And by next week, we shall have all 8 webinars available and on recording for you to play back at any time at your own convenience. We will have 4 speakers this evening. We have Joanne Lee from Singapore, the Director for Asia Pacific at Black Sun. We have Erica Susanto from UK, Head of Research at Black Sun UK. And we have our guest speakers this evening, Yolen Sim, Special Advisor to Singapore Exchange and Global Vice Chair at the Tcfd, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. So it's a great honor to have Len Sim to be on the panel this evening together with Sally Pilot. Sally is our Head of Insights at Black Sun in London, and she has many years of experience in corporate reporting and is a big fan of Tcfd and sustainability. So a hard-hitting panel, great speakers who will be sharing with us on sustainability frameworks in Singapore, Malaysia, and the UK. A hot topic today in sustainability, of course, unfortunately used in a different way in pandemic times, how companies talk about whether they're sustainable moving forward. But that said, sustainability, whether it's being able to survive the pandemic, being able to talk about green, it means the same thing. It's really how to think in the long term. Joanne, can I have the next slide, please? We'll be starting in about 5 minutes time for those who are just logged in. Good morning to those who are in the UK. Good evening for those who are from Singapore, Malaysia, we have participants from Indonesia. Welcome to the 8th webinar series, Trust series that we've been organizing with the Working Capital and Black Sun. The speakers for us for this evening are Joanne Lee, a Director and Head of Research and Strategy at Black Sun Group Asia Pacific. And we have Erica Susanto, Head of Research and Black Sun Group in the UK. Both Joanne and Erica will be speaking on sustainability frameworks in Singapore, Malaysia, and the UK, giving you a bird's eye view of how companies report with regards to sustainability, and also sharing with you the latest in research that we've done on Tcfd, specifically maybe focus in on the aspects of sustainability. And after Joanne and Erica, we have our special guests, Ms. Yolien Sim, the Special Advisor at Singapore Exchange and Global Vice Chair of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. Together with Lian Sim, we have Ms. Sally Pilot, Director and Chief Insight Officer at Black Sun Group in the UK. Both Sally and Lian Sim will be on the panel, moderated by myself. And we have quite a few questions for both of them to be referring to for this evening's panel after the presentation by Joanne and Erica. Maybe we'll go to the next slide, Joanne, in terms of the questions that we'll be posing to the panelists, both Lian Sim and Sally. So for Lian Sim and Sally, the first question that we'll be asking them towards the end of this session in terms of the panel will be sharing with us the purpose of Tcfd. Tcfd is really hot, thousands of supporters around the world. And in fact, in the UK, they're planning to make it mandatory in the year 2022. Not there yet, but certainly thoughts in process with regards to the UK. We've just done a research on the UK FTSE 100 companies on their Tcfd disclosure, and Erica will be sharing with us on that. We'll also be asking Lian Sim and Sally with regards to what are the benefits for companies who adopt Tcfd, whether it's mandatory or not. We've seen a lot of overtures by exchanges and central banks in Singapore and Malaysia requiring disclosure for Tcfd, both on a voluntary basis at this point in time. But certainly, what's the benefit to them? And we hope that Lian Sim and Sally will be able to give us some insights on Tcfd. Specifically, we'll be asking Sally what is she seeing on the ground in the UK with regards to the FTSE companies, with regards to Tcfd adoption. And hopefully we'll be able to hear from Lian Sim with regards to some of her insights as to the next big steps being planned for Tcfd at the global level on Tcfd reporting, climate change reporting. And finally, as you see from the background picture there, Christmas has come early. We'll be asking both Lian Sim and Sally what's their Christmas wish for Tcfd and also sustainability in general. What hope do we have in terms of around the corner with regards to sustainability reporting? How does that dovetail with the climate that we're in right now? Well, not just climate change, but the climate that the pandemic is serving to us right now. And hopefully they'll be able to see some good steps moving forward for Tcfd as their Christmas wish. So that's the questions that we'll be posing the panelists, both Lian Sim and Sally, at the end of the session for today. So we'll be holding the panel around 7:30. So from now to 7:30, we'll be having Joanne and Erica sharing with us their thoughts on sustainability frameworks. How does Tcfd fit in? And then at 7:30, we'll have the panel. And we targeted to end by 8 o'clock. And by then, we should have inundated you with a whole host of stuff on sustainability frameworks, Tcfd research, and really the next steps forward as to what the benefits for companies with regards to green and sustainability. We'll be following very closely with regards to the synopsis that we've laid out for you in the mailers that you've been receiving. And with that, let's now dive very quickly into the presentation today. I'll start off with how we started with this 8 webinar series. We were researching as to what are the topics that's relevant for building trust, which we believe is the most valuable currency today. And trust is more than just money. Trust is all about gaining traction with your stakeholders with regards to culture, tone at the top, stakeholder engagement, and of course, sustainability, including things like risk management, business models. So based on the research, we found that there are 8 components of trust. And that was back in early April of this year. And that's where we started by planning a series of 8 webinars with regards to how it's related to trust. How do you gain trust with your stakeholders? And we started with corporate culture on 2nd of April. And with that, every 2 weeks, without fail, more or less, we've been holding a trust webinar, starting with corporate culture on 2nd of April, and going on with stakeholder engagement, business model, risk management, long-term value creation, purpose, tone at the top. And finally, today, we are ending the trust series with the number 8 on sustainability framework. And we believe that all these are all intertwined with each other, and they all one road lead to trust. They all lead to trust. The QR code that you have there, you can take a snapshot of that. It will link you to the 7 recordings that we have completed so far for the 7 webinar series. And by sometime next week, we will have the 8th one today that's being recorded. And what we hope to do is that we'll be packaging all 8 in a webinar series that will have the slides, will have learning outcomes, so that you can play back that anytime to help your organization gain trust with your stakeholders. And that's how we started with the 8. And today, to cap it, is really on sustainability framework. Next slide, Joanne. And with that, I will hand over to Joanne and to Erica to take us on the journey onto what is sustainability, what is ESG, how they different, what are the frameworks, what is good, what is bad, and what are the best practices in UK, in Singapore, and in Malaysia. And with that, over to you, Joanne. Joanne, you're on mute.
Right. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Right. Good evening, everyone in APAC, and good morning to our friends in UK as well. Thank you for joining us today. So I thought I'll start with just outlining what sustainability and ESG means to the different jurisdictions, around the world. So sustainability tends to have different definitions depending on the regulatory frameworks that we have. So let's start with in Malaysia, the definition of sustainability typically is around material, economic, environmental, and social risks and opportunities. So the Bursa requires, the local boost requires a narrative statement of the listed issues, management of these issues. So we're looking at EES, whereas in Singapore it's slightly different, where we're talking about the material, economic, social, and governance factors, so ESG. In UK, the UK Stewardship Code Principle 7, which is targeted towards asset owners and managers, requires signatories to systematically integrate stewardship and investment, including material, environmental, social, and governance issues and climate change to fulfill their responsibilities. So in UK, it takes a slightly different turn where they're talking about ESG plus the addition of climate change as well. So as I go through the slides, I appreciate that the audience here is very diverse. So as I go through the slides, when I talk about sustainability, just have in mind, the different definitions that is applicable to your various jurisdictions. And on the second part here, I'll just paint very quickly what we're seeing in terms of the sustainability reporting landscape. So what is expected in sustainability and ESG? We're seeing a lot of different frameworks and initiatives and ratings and rankers coming up with their own frameworks to quantify and help companies assess their climate risk, their sustainability risks and opportunities. So starting on the left, top left, we have the reporting and management frameworks such as integrated reporting, GRI, and SASB. We also have some transparency initiatives such as the SDGs and TCFDs that intend to shed some light on particular issues such as climate change. And we also have the ratings and rankers and the credit rating agencies that are incorporating ESG. And the second last one, we also have the indices that companies subscribe to. And we are also seeing some AI solutions because the sustainability sustainability landscape is so unstructured. So they find that there is an opportunity for these AI solutions to come in to provide insights to investors as to what are the risks and opportunities in sustainability investment. So what we're seeing here is essentially a very crowded and increasingly crowded space for sustainability reporting and frameworks. We have all sorts of frameworks, coming up with, most sustainable companies and rankings, and it is very confusing for corporates because they do not know which one to pick. So on this next slide here, what we are trying to do is to simplify the process. To help you provide a structure as to how you should think about or how you can think about these frameworks. So on the top there, you have your societal principles and aspirations. So the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact and the 17 principles of the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are the universal call to actions that advance societal goals. And supporting that, you have the reporting frameworks, which is a set of principle-based guidance for how information can be structured and prepared, and for what broad topics are covered. It's often used to facilitate a focus on broader issues such as sustainable development, climate change, for example, and if you look at the bottom one, UN GPRF, that provides a framework for disclosing the human rights. So, so that is the how. The reporting frameworks provide a way for companies to structure their thinking around how to report on these specific sustainability issues, whereas the standards provide you the what. So it facilitates and supports the frameworks, and it helps to bring actionable, provide specific, replicable and detailed requirements of what should be reported for each topic to ensure a high quality of non-financial disclosures. So under here, you have the more commonly used frameworks such as SASB and GRI. So SASB addresses financial materiality. So it looks at the environmental and social impact on the company. So it's the outside in. So it helps companies to identify financially material issues, which are the issues that are reasonably likely to impact the financial condition of the company, and therefore SASB is more suitable if you are trying to talk to investors. GRI, on the other hand, addresses ESG materiality. So it's talking about the company's impact on environment and society. So it's the inside out perspective, right? So both of these help to facilitate companies to identify what to report and how to report them. And this both of them, when they work together, they're actually addressing the double materiality concept, which came up from the EU Non-Financial Reporting Directive. So what we know now is that there is a concerted effort for SASB and GRI to link up so that the financial materiality and ESG materiality offer. Let me backtrack. So SASB and GRI are working together to make it easier and link up so that companies are able to report more succinctly towards sustainability. So what's important here is that don't get too caught up with all the frameworks. What is important is that you identify what your stakeholders' needs are, select the frameworks which would fulfill those needs. It may be one, it may be two, but as long as you're meeting your stakeholders' needs. So what is the business case? So the global trends that we are seeing today are these four that I've highlighted here. So there's increased global awareness for environmental sustainability. We are also seeing changing information needs of investors, governments, business, and society. We're seeing reduced corporate trust on a global scale, as shown in the Edelman Barometer. And lastly, we're also seeing technological disruptions and the fourth industrial revolution, which is pushing companies to be more adaptable in the long run. And more recently, I think the pandemic has also really exposed companies in terms of their sustainability practices. The pandemic has shown that those who are more mature in their sustainability practices tend to be more resilient and adaptable. So from the investment management side, so this is Larry Fink's letter to CEOs and shareholders. So BlackRock has voted against the management and board of directors where companies are not making sufficient progress on sustainability-related disclosures and the business practices and plans underlying them. So that is their message to CEOs. And to shareholders, on the other hand, he also said that they believe that sustainability should be a new standard for investing. So there is pressure from the investment management aspect of things. And there's also increased investor expectations, as seen in the number of signatories in the UN PRI, the Principles for Responsible Investment, which has grown from 63 to over 2,700 investment companies from 2006 to today. So the PRI basically is a voluntary and aspirational set of investment principles that offer a menu of possible actions for incorporating ESG issues into investment practice. So we are seeing increased pressure on corporates from the holders of assets as well as investors. So this has, we do see some concrete reasons for supporting sustainability efforts. So the first stat that you're seeing out there is that now we're seeing US $30.7 trillion is invested into ESG funds, and a substantial percentage of all professionally managed assets are in ESG funds. So that's 63% in Australia and New Zealand, 49% in UK, and 26% in US. And collectively, that represents a 34% growth over 2 years. So it's really short. And this report came out in 2018. It's due to be replicated again this year. So it'll be interesting to see how these numbers grow. And in ASEAN, what we're seeing is the volume of green bonds and loans issued in ASEAN has almost doubled between 2018 and 19, growing to $7.8 billion US from 4.1 billion in 2018. And half of these bond issuance are represented by Singapore bonds. So Singapore is leading the way in ASEAN on this. So the message is very clear. Doing well on ESG is synonymous with access to capital. So what does a greater focus on sustainability mean for corporates? First of all, there will be a great communications challenge. You cannot afford to have a gap between what you say and what you do. And you have to be consistent because you can't be saying one thing to shareholders and another to stakeholders. So this highlights the importance of honesty, authenticity, and a joined up story. So from the clients that we work with, both in UK and Singapore, what we've seen is that as sustainability reporting gets more entrenched in corporate consciousness, we see a natural evolution in the process and thinking of companies. So in terms of process, we're starting to see that companies are starting the process and publishing earlier. We are also seeing multidisciplinary teams across the business involved in the reporting process, development and oversight. And we also see sustainability being integrated into the strategic process. The next thing that we also see is that more and better data are being collected, and tone and messaging from the leadership is often more personable and accountable. And as a result of all this, with better data and more integratedness in terms of sustainability and strategy, we're seeing greater clarity and consistency of messaging across the different channels and business. In terms of the thinking, we also see an evolution of that, where the board is more involved in the process in the comms process. We are also seeing the role of governance and reporting converging. So it used to be the case that it's very siloed, but now it's coming together very, very intricately. Materiality and discussions determining the objective of the report is also happening more frequently. And the role of stakeholders are also becoming more important and more strategic. So we're seeing this natural evolution in the process of thinking of corporates who are incorporating sustainability more and more into the company. But having said all that, there are also a lot of common challenges that we're hearing across the companies. First of all, like what I went through earlier, there's a proliferation of different framework standards, metrics, and demands. So we have different stakeholders demanding different things. And as a result of that, you find yourself being stuck as to which frameworks to adopt. We're also seeing multiple strategies which do not link together, and because it could be due to a lack of internal understanding of the strategy. We're also seeing a lack of clarity about how to achieve mission or purpose. And the fourth one there, I think is one of the very stark things that we're seeing in terms of challenges. There are internal silos. So departments, for example, the risk department, working, without coordinating with the sustainability department. So there is internal silos within organizations and missing skills. And there's also external silos with auditors and investors who may not necessarily appreciate the role sustainability plays in the organization. And we're also seeing some challenges in terms of cost because of legacy data systems, and it would cost a lot to upgrade these systems to capture the necessary data. And I think the last point there would be the most difficult one, which is that people resist change. So these are generally some of the common challenges that we're seeing across the businesses that we work with. And of those that we observe to be the most resilient companies, what we're seeing is that these are some of the key characteristics they have. One is that they have very meaningful stakeholder engagement programs that helps to ensure that the concepts and issues are truly material to the company, and that it is handled and managed in the appropriate way at the very top of the organization. Secondly, we also observe that the boards of this company are very accountable. So they're very involved and they're true conduits for integrated thinking in the organization. The third one is about sharper and weighted KPIs. So we find that these companies have KPIs that are linked to long-term value creation and support the business evolution towards integrated thinking. And finally, we also observe that the companies that are resilient they consider the future in a robust and holistic manner, and they tend to have a clearer strategy and purpose in place. And I think a key thing that cuts across all these companies, all these characteristics, is that they approach sustainability and strategy in a very integrated fashion. And that's why they can be successful at what they do and can remain resilient in the long term. So these three things here are useful key takeaways for better communications. First of all, think in an integrated fashion. Develop an integrated approach to all your communications across all media, and ensure consistency in the information that you're sharing throughout the year. Not just in what you're saying, but as the first point there as well, to ensure that it's consistent throughout all channels as well. And also, I think this would precede everything, which is to strengthen the interdepartmental links to help share information and break down the silo thinking. So without integrated departments, you won't have integrated thinking, you won't have an integrated approach to doing things. So the second part there is to be authentic in your engagement. Ensure that all your communications are based on credible and real aspects of the business. Focus on what matters most to your relevant stakeholders to reflect their interests. And also communicate in a way that's comprehensive but understandable, and ensure that your communications are balanced and neutral. And the last bit there is to have a storytelling approach to how you communicate. So build, report, and reinforce key themes and messages, for example, your organization's purpose, and reflect on how sustainability fits into that. Secondly, tell also your company story and reinforce the unique characteristics that makes you different from your peers. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the reporting trends that we are seeing in sustainability. So generally, most of the companies that we look at fall into one of these three categories. Sustainability, if you start from the left-hand side, we see some companies having a siloed approach to sustainability, where it references non-financial factors as sustainability issues, but not as business issues. So you may see some of, in APAC at least, some of the companies looking at sustainability from a pure CSR kind of marketing sort of approach. But I would say that would be the minority of companies. Most companies in UK as well as APAC would be in the second category or the third category. So in the second category, on the strategic journey, we're seeing companies approaching non-financial factors from a strategic point of view. So they're starting to integrate non-financial factors and describing how they are aligned with strategy. And some of them are in the advanced portion, which is complete integration of sustainability and strategy. So they consider how broader factors and stakeholder needs form the basis for strategy and long-term sustainability. I'll spend some time talking about the reporting trends in sustainability in Malaysia and Singapore. And later on, my colleague Erica will be covering the trends that she's seeing in UK. So what we're seeing in Singapore and Malaysia, so in this research, we were looking at the top 30 companies by market cap in Malaysia and Singapore. So we're looking at 30 companies in Malaysia and 30 companies in Singapore. So the first thing that we're seeing is that sustainability is becoming a strategic business issue. And we see that evidence in reporting because they are starting to integrate sustainability into the business model and into strategy. So if you look at Malaysia, that's about 31% and 10% respectively, and in Singapore, 20% and 7%. So if you take the totals of that, in Malaysia, we are seeing sustainability considered as a strategic business issue in among 41% of Malaysian companies, and in Singapore, 27%. And we're also seeing that companies are taking a materiality approach to sustainability. And we look at materiality from two aspects. So the first column there, you would see that 24% of Malaysian companies and 67% of Singapore companies are considering sustainability issues in their risk registers. So identifying, some of them are identifying sustainability issues as principal risks. So that is the material risk aspect of things. But we're also seeing them looking at sustainability from a stakeholder materiality perspective. So in Malaysia, that's about 90%, in Singapore, 47%. So in Malaysia, the reason why that number is so high is because they started mandating sustainability reporting. So that's why it's so much further up from Malaysia, from Singapore. The next thing that we're seeing is that sustainability is at the top of table, right? So we see the leadership taking lead on sustainability issues in Malaysia and Singapore. It's a bit on the low side for Malaysia at 17%, but over half of Singaporean companies are referencing have their leaders referencing ESG in their statements. And in terms of the disclosing the governance of sustainability issues, we also see, again, Malaysia being a bit on the high side at 90%. That's probably due to the requirements on sustainability reporting. And in Singapore, that's 63%. So I suppose when you're looking at the stats, we can see that at least in Malaysia, there is a very regulatory approach to reporting. So it's they tick the box in terms of identifying where responsibility lies for sustainability in the company, but we have yet to see it being considered within the leaders' statements on ESG. So perhaps it's a game of catch up. So as regulation is introduced and it takes time for sustainability to appear on corporate consciousness. So we expect these numbers to rise in the future. The other thing that we're seeing is, in terms of sustainability reporting trends, is the rise in Tcfd reporting. So what we did was we looked at the trends in Tcfd reporting among Malaysian and Singaporean banks. And the reason being is because Malaysia recently announced that they are about to mandate the reporting of climate issues and climate risks among the banks. So we thought that it would be timely to have a dipstick test to see where they are in terms of reporting. So what we're seeing is we have over half of companies in both Singapore and Malaysia having climate issues on the CEOs and chairman's agenda. And if you look at the second column and the third column, we're seeing that the board and the role of board and management in governing and managing climate change are great areas of opportunity, especially for the Malaysian banks. On this next slide here, there are clear opportunities for both Malaysia and Singapore to demonstrate the strategic alignment of climate-related issues and how they are being managed. So I think one of the toughest things about implementing Tcfd is disclosing, how resilient the strategy is in relation to using climate-related scenarios. So we can see this evidence in the numbers. It's one of the lowest scores amongst all the questions that we had. So Malaysia, we see none of the banks implementing climate-related scenarios, whereas a quarter of the banks in Singapore look at climate-related scenarios. And the second and third column there, you're looking at how many of the banks in Malaysia and Singapore describe the process for managing climate-related risks. So in Singapore, that's about half of the banks, and in Malaysia, a third. And on the right-hand side, you see how many companies have identified climate risk as a principal risk. So if you look at the second and the third column together, you'll see that there is conscious effort to integrate climate-related issues into your risk management. But as you go on to the third column, climate issues are not yet being considered principal risks for these banks. So again, we expect that to increase in the future as climate-related issues become more pressing. And this last slide here talks about the metrics and targets that banks are using to assess climate-related risks and opportunities. So there is about 3/4 of the Singapore banks disclosing metrics and targets, whereas in Malaysia it's about 60% using metrics and only 30% disclosing targets. So again, we expect this to increase as the issues become more pressing. And I'll pass the mic over to my colleague, Erica, to provide you a review of the TCFD reporting landscape in FTSE 100.
Thank you, Joanne. Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm here to present some of the findings that we have been seeing during our review of the TCFD reporting trends among the FTSE 100 on the research that we conducted earlier this year. Just a little bit of a background. We started tracking the TCFD reporting actually 3 years ago, originally as part of our annual analysis of the FTSE 100 annual reports. Last year, however, under the Horizon Series banner, we published our very first TCFD-specific research report. Now, we think that the consideration around climate issues are becoming ever more important in this current pandemic for all economies to build back better. Around the world, we see governments like Canada and Denmark are examples, putting requirements around sustainable, resilient recovery before extending government support scheme for businesses. So these areas are definitely of concern, and it's really something that corporates need to take into account in their recovery strategy. In the UK, all listed companies and large asset owners are expected to disclose in line with the TCFD recommendations by 2022. And moving forward, it is likely that TCFD reporting will become compulsory, as Wan Chun mentioned earlier. So it is already part of the UK green finance strategy that the government disclosed last year. Our second TCFD research report is being published soon. And so the following is a preview of some of the findings that we see. This slide here that Joanne has shown it's a summary, really, of all the metrics that we have been tracking. We track metrics related to all 11 of the TCFD recommendations, as well as some additional metrics around the uptake of climate issues in the leadership statements of the annual report. Now, as you can see, the summary, if you see, you can, the numbers are quite small, but the if you see the yellow dots being, the previous years where we reviewed the 2018 annual reports, and the blue ones are the most latest numbers based on review of the 2019 annual reports. We see that across the board there is an improvement, a positive movement, and some is more than others in the individual metrics, but the movement is a positive one from one year to another. Now, our upcoming report is titled Accelerated Action for Climate Resilience, because while we see a significant increase in the companies referencing the TCFD, we think that there are still gaps between company commitments and meaningful disclosures that will need to be addressed in an accelerated manner, I think. Joanne, if you can move to the next slide, please. So heading on to some of the insights that we see around leadership, we see that more companies this year are discussing climate change issues in the chair and CEO statements. This is a big jump. We see that now little under half of the FTSE 100 describe leadership approach around climate issues, and this is from only 16% in 2018. And also encouragingly, the next set of numbers illustrates the move to a majority of the FTSE 100 referencing Tcfd from a majority that didn't. So last year this number was 39%, and this year we have the majority referencing Tcfd, 67%. However, when we dig a little bit deeper, despite the increased reference, we find still very few companies meeting all 11 disclosure recommendations. That number still stays stubbornly at around 3% from last year. Next slide, please, Joan. Moving on to areas of risk and opportunities, we find that our analysis shows a noticeable shift in discussion around risk and opportunities of climate change this year, with almost half of the companies discussing climate-related risks in their principal risk section, compared to only 32 last year. And again, and we dig a little deeper to see how that translates to implementation in business strategies, we find that only 7% describe the resilience of their strategy against at least one climate scenario, including a 2 degrees or lower scenario. So there are still challenges in embedding into business strategies from risk. Next slide, please. Looking at governance, there has been some clear progression on board oversight of climate issues, with 48% of the FTSE 100s evidencing this, up from only 26% last year. However, when we look closer, the discussion seems to be mainly focused on who takes responsibility at board and management levels, with little information on how the board has oversight, really. We are seeing only 38% disclose both board and management's role in managing those climate-related risks. In addition, we are also seeing companies forming steering committees, and these committees are, of course, in charge of the climate-related issues, and they report to different factions. I guess there's some report to audit, some report to sustainability, some report directly to board. So we feel that ownership in this topic is a little bit fragmented, and it's a development that is interesting to keep our eyes on, I think, in the future, to see where eventually that will land. And Joanne, coming to our last couple of findings. One more area where we see areas for improvement is that we see not all companies that discuss climate-related risk under their principal risks also discuss the opportunities, and vice versa. And this is despite the TCFD explicitly asking companies to discuss both the risks and opportunities. Our findings show only 29% report on both as per the TCFD recommendation. So there's still gaps there and opportunities to improve. And finally, we are seeing that companies are taking a variety of approaches and terms when setting emission goals. But overall, we see a trend in the growing number of companies that sets ambitious targets to reduce emissions. Almost half of the FTSE, 46% now, are setting net zero or science-based targets today, up from just a quarter last year. This is encouraging, and it is in line with the UK government's target of bringing all greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. And that concludes my preview and summarizes the overall findings. And I will now hand over the mic, I think, to Wan Chern.
Thanks, Erica, and thanks, Joanne. Before I go on to some of the questions that I think some of you participants may have in your mind, maybe I can do a panel. I'm being a little bit cheeky here by invoking Joanne and Erica. You know, there's lots of frameworks. I can see it's a bit alphabet soup. Tcfd, GRS, SBs, IR. I get confused. And if you look at the survey results, it seems like we are stuck. Our companies are stuck at the technical level in terms of compliance, in terms of disclosure, and somehow they're not thinking strategic enough in terms of the business case. At least in Singapore, Malaysia, the leadership is not taking on the role that they should in driving strategy using sustainability or climate change or GRIs and all these standards. So we seem to be stuck at the bottom there. So maybe Joanne and Erica, maybe you can shed some light on this for the participants. How do we get out of this funk? Get out from the lower depths of sustainability and get it up to be more strategic. Over to you both, ladies.
Maybe I'll start first. I suppose you would need to have a concerted effort both from the bottom up and the top down. I think the working level, those who are involved in strategy and sustainability, I think there needs to be conscious effort to get in touch with each other, link up, and work in an integrated fashion. So push the agenda towards the leadership. And from the top, we can also have champions at the leadership level to push the sustainability agenda forward. So when you have both the top down and the bottom up approach, I think we can push the sustainability agenda forward very, very quickly.
Thanks, Joanne. And Erica, from your point of view in the UK, are we still stuck at the bottom, or you see we slowly precipitating upwards in terms of more strategic thinking?
No, I think I see that there's, as our research shown, there's definitely more uptake and ownership from the leadership level now, even though it has been over the years more of a upward traveling movement. Movement from the bottom up, but now that I guess there's also increasing pressure from the top. I think at some point the convergence point is that everyone will head towards the same direction. So I don't really have anything new to say because everything Joanne said is I think I agree with. We always believe that leadership sets the tone from the top. And so it's very important for leadership to own the issue, and that's why one of the things we like about Tcfd is that it brings the issue of climate to the board level, and that helps with the integration of strategy within the business. And to be honest, again, the framework can be applied to any other sustainability issue, really, and that's hopefully what we see moving forward.
Thanks. You know what really drives me nuts, Joanne and Erica, is a lot of companies, they talk about GRI, they talk about TCFDs, they talk about SBs and IR, SDGs, and all these acronyms. Somehow, when you get to the top, the board and senior management will roll their eyes and say, "Get it done," but they don't, just get it done. And at the working level, they get frustrated because it doesn't permeate through the strategy. So how do you stop that conversation, or just talking about a GRI, and tick the box, and then they seem that by ticking the box, they're complete in terms of their sustainability framework, but they don't talk about sustainability strategy. So how do you take the conversation one step further beyond the framework? I know, Joanne, you talk about the bottoms up, but how do you educate the top down? Do we train board directors on GRI, or do we train the working level on strategy, and somehow we are able to meet in the middle? Profound question.
I suppose it has to be both, and like as Erica said as well, I mean, a lot of it is driven from the tone at the top, right? So I think at some point as well, there has to be education for the board on these sort of issues. Not to say that they are not aware of it, but they probably do not know what to do next. So in terms of director training and all that, I think there needs to be some effort on that aspect as well. And I suppose that the CEO as well needs to play a part in championing or integrating and considering sustainability issues at the strategic level. So yeah, I think pretty much that's it.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. Erica, any thoughts before we go to the
I
real panel?
Yeah, I think it's really the key is to get the board to understand that it doesn't make sense eventually to have, at the end of the day, to have two separate strategies, a business strategy and sustainability strategy, because there should really only be one strategy that is sustainable. And in a lot of sense, everything is converging now to make everyone realize that all of these topics that traditionally were considered sustainability or CSR topics are actually very relevant to investors. So investors are asking these questions as well, and that's why we are now pivoting sort of from sustainability to ESG, right? When we're looking about talking about some of these topics. So I think it's hopefully becoming easier to for I don't know what you call it, the working levels to communicate this upward to say that, look, this is a business issue. This is not just a nice tease anymore. It's actually a business issue. Investors are asking about it, and it's something that needs to be considered in a strategy level. Yeah.
Thanks, Erica, and I'm glad that you have good segue into the questions that I think participants would have on this slide here. Thanks, Joanne and Erica, for leading this in. So the challenge for participants and companies out there is really some of these questions. Finding out what do investors really want, how do we compare to peers, we're under internal pressure to perform because all the boxes have been ticked, but yet we've been pressed to do more, and sustainability seems to be the answer to some of these challenges. And things like getting data, we want to score better, but we don't have the resources to gather the data. So here we have sort of compiled some of these challenging questions that companies face throughout our work, and these are some of the responses that Black Sun has helped companies on, and some of the collaterals that you can develop yourself or with Black Sun with regards to how do you respond to some of these challenges. And if I can go to the next slide, Joanne, additional questions on what questions you may have with regards to sustainability. It's integral of what we do, but we don't know how to communicate, and that's been the question that you've been bringing up, Joanne, again and again. How do you integrate that thinking? How do you bring the top to the bottom and the bottom to the top? And somehow they meet somewhere in the middle in terms of the strategy and the thinking behind the framework. And these are some of our responses and collateral. So with that, so thank you, Joanne and Erica, for helping us to set the scene on sustainability framework, some of the research results, the more specific ones on Tcfd, where it's generally heading towards. So there still seems to be some hope for us in terms of the future with regards to sustainability reporting. We see some trends in improvements in the UK. In Singapore and Malaysia, there's still room for improvement. And with that, let's bring on the panel. Joanne, you can bring on the panel discussion. So we got a couple of heavy hitters, Lin Sim, Special Advisor to Singapore Exchange, and the Global Vice Chair on Tcfd, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. For those who haven't found out by now, Tcfd is a long phrase, but being shortened is easy to pronounce. Tcfd. Lin Sim is an old friend, fellow board director, and she's going to be in a panel together with Sally. Sally Pilot, you can bring up the next slide, Joanne, is our head of Chief Insight Officer and Engagement Director at Black Sun. Years of experience in corporate reporting, sits on the board of the Investor Relations Association in the UK, very experienced. And so I guess by now you've noticed that I've got 4 ladies, 2 on the panel and 2 speakers. So I'm treading on dangerous ground here. But with that, let me bring on both Len Sim and Sally. And Joanne and Erica, please stay on and chime in as when you needed to, when you need to. So these are the 5 questions I'm going to pose to Len Sim and Sally. We start with the purpose of TCFD. So why in the world did we start TCFD, and is it going to change the world? I'm sure Sally and Len Sim have some insights on that. What are the benefits of companies who adopt TCFD? If it's such a hot topic, what's in it for them? For Sally, what she's seeing on the ground in the UK, especially now it's going to be made mandatory by 2022. Is it going to happen in Singapore, in Malaysia? What does the future portend for us? And specifically, Len Sim, what's the big next step for TCFD? It's been around for what, a couple of years, Len Sim? What does Michael Bloomberg want? So you have the inside track. So we're going to tap you on that. And finally, Christmas comes early. We all need that cheer for all of us, given the pandemic. We need a Christmas gift. What does Christmas comes with TCFD for us? And with that, maybe over to Lian Sim as the caretaker for TCFD. What was the purpose for setting up TCFD?
Okay, well, let me take it from a different angle. Like, you can read the reasons for TCFD on the TCFD website, but I'd put it this way. If we start from climate change and recognize this as a major secular trend, we'll know that with such a big movement, you're going to have major financial effects. And if it's so important that countries around the world will volunteer to slow the process, we know that there is going to be policy changes as the world transitions. So with all these major effects, you would be concerned about financial stability. And so at the most macro level, the purpose of TCFD recommending disclosures to be made is so that people who use the disclosures can manage the transition in order to have financial stability as we transition to the future. If you think about the financial institutions themselves, you've got banks, insurance companies, and asset owners and asset managers. All of them use information provided by companies. They are exposed to these companies in terms of the funds that they put out. And they need that information. So companies need to provide information on how climate change affects them, affects their strategy, their risk, how they governances matter, and what metrics and targets they use in the process. So these are useful information that they need to know and that they should then tell their stakeholders, like financial institutions, so that they can in turn internalize that into their operations and then pass that information along down that value chain right to the ultimate beneficiary of the pension fund, that depositor of the bank. So it's that value chain. And so on one hand, you can say that if everyone has information, we can piece it all together and have a big picture. But I rather think it's not so easy. I'd rather say that if individuals have the information that they need in order to make informed decisions about their financial assets, then they can take care of themselves, as it were. And on a macro basis, you then have a much more stable financial system than you would have otherwise. So I think that really is the purpose of TCFD. And may I add this, that being a market solution, a recommendation by market practitioners to other market practitioners, then you have a certain more assurance that it is implementable, quickly implementable. It may be tough, the ask may be a big one, but you can go some way towards it rather than having someone, as it were, from on high, imposing a standard where you do not know for sure if it will be relevant to so many sectors. So I think that's why a disclosure and a recommended disclosure, so that it dovetails with regulatory regimes around the world and can be implemented.
Thanks, Nancy. So Nancy, I hear you in terms of the value chain, and if with any chain, it's as good as its weakest link. So all of us need to play a role in that value chain, and if everybody
Yes.
plays their part, everybody will be much better for it.
Yes, for sure, indeed.
Thank you, Lindsay. Sally, maybe we hear from you from a practitioner point of view. What do you think is the purpose of TCFD?
Thank you, Wanchan, and lovely to have so many of you on the phone with us today. Thanks for taking the time. Great to be here. Look, everything that Lim Sim said I absolutely agree with. Some really good points, particularly around the value chain. And I wanted to pick up on two things really from a practitioner perspective. I think the purpose of TCFD, it's a very helpful tool in supporting stakeholder engagement from a corporate perspective, and it gives companies the opportunity to demonstrate to their stakeholders, investors, clients, employees, and others about how they're engaging proactively with the risks and opportunities presented by climate change. And I think that's really important. And I think the other thing in that is it's also an opportunity to demonstrate how companies are really preparing for the future. So how they're managing their longer term viability, which is becoming increasingly important in this idea of resilience over time, and how these things are being embedded into decision-making processes. So I think it's a really good tool, taking on board everything Lim Sing said, but it's a really good tool to help corporates prepare themselves for the future.
Thanks, Sally, for that, for reinforcing what Lin Sim said. And maybe Sally, back to you again. What's in it for companies who want to adopt TCFD? More money, more power, more influence?
All of the above, Wanchan, all of the above. Let's hope. Look, I think there are a couple of key benefits for companies. I'll run through sort of 4 or 5 that I think are really important. I think, just building on what I said before, this idea of developing long-term thinking and resilience, I think is really, really important for companies. And I think, again, it's a useful exercise and very helpful in that process. I think better decision-making is key to all this. Increased awareness and understanding of climate-related risks, opportunities, and the implications of those things really help to inform more strategic planning and better risk management business. So I think eventually it runs to better decisions and better run businesses. I think that's really important. One of the other benefits that we've seen working with companies is strengthened governance arrangements, particularly at the board level, but also permeating throughout the organization, like Joanne was picking up on, from the bottom and also from the top. But it really helps to strengthen internal collaboration and integrated thinking, because due to the nature of climate risks, climate issues spanning risk, finance, sustainability, governance, all those different issues, we're seeing TCFD is being used as a tool for companies to better collaborate and develop an integrated approach, because these things are business issues. So we need to pull on the business together. So I think that's a very helpful internal benefit. The other benefit I would say from the corporate perspective is helping to retain and build stakeholder trust. Every day we're hearing more and more investors want to understand what's happening on this. So I think, again, to reiterate my point from the other question, the framework can help companies to identify the opportunities and to differentiate themselves. And there are opportunities in this transition to a low carbon economy that I don't think should be forgotten. And I think also that leads to the idea of access to capital, because we know more and more decisions are being made on that basis. by investors. And I think that's really important to demonstrate how companies are doing it. And then the final thing I would say is that the benefit of this, and I don't think it should just be seen as a climate issue. I think it's a really good opportunity to focus on other sustainability issues and get them onto the boardroom agenda. So I tell our clients to use it as a tool to obviously get climate on the agenda, because that's what is top of mind at the moment, but to use it as a tool to get the broader sustainability issues onto the agenda of the board and understand how these are impacting long-term performance. And I think that's really important moving forward. So those are the 4 or 5 benefits, I would say, from a corporate perspective that we're seeing, Wansha.
Thanks, Sally. So if I can paraphrase, it's really more a means to an end. Climate TCFD is really helps to change the mindset on long-term thinking, and the other things that relates to long-term thinking, like resilience, being able to sustain a business model.
Yes. Wanshan, as we've talked about a lot before, we see reporting, the process of reporting, as the valuable bit of it that drives a lot of thinking internally, helps to align against certain strategies, and then disclosure commits one to doing things. So it's the process, as you said, of going through the process of having to disclose, which I think there's a huge amount of internal benefits for companies.
Thanks, Sally. And over to you, Linsim. I was just looking at the TCFD supporters on your website, on the Tcfd website, and I noticed that as of February 2020 this year, we have 1,027 supporters.
Yes.
And only 2 for Malaysia, which is Bursa Malaysia and Securities Commission. So given that the Bank Negara has mandated TCFD reporting, why aren't more companies signing up as supporters, and how does this portend for benefits to companies in a roundabout way?
I think that I can't answer for why companies sign up and don't sign up, but I will say that I think in a way, I think companies are being honest. If they sign up, I think they do expect that they will have to make disclosures, and that it will take effort, and that then they probably understand that they may not be as confident about just signing up and then we tick the box. I don't think they see this as a tick the box exercise, which is good.
Good point.
So they are thinking before they're actually signing up.
Yep.
Among the companies I've interacted with, some of them I asked, why aren't you signing up as a supporter? And I get this reply, you know us, Lenzim, we'll go try it out internally and make sure that we can handle it before we actually commit.
Good
so
point.
I believe that some are doing it and getting that benefit before they're confident enough to say, we will do this on an ongoing basis, because they don't want to start and then stop because it's uncomfortable. And once you've started, you have to be on that disclosure trajectory. The other thing is that some of the asks are not so easy.
Yep.
They are like scenario analysis, like it's area under the curve, whereas stress test is that outlier. So it's your best guess, but there are many pathways. In Tcfd, we recommend some of the more well-known and more readily available ones to be used, but even so, it is difficult, and companies do have to form these task force of their own or internal committees to actually get together. So I think that although they may not all be reporting to the same, CEO, or they're reporting all around, but at least they're talking, at least they've made a start. And I think that's the only way to actually move it forward well. So I've also heard from some companies that they bit the bullet, did it, and it needs a certain strong person, sometimes the CFO, if not the CEO, to actually get the movement going, and then it adds on. But of course, as you said, tone from the top is really important, and what the top says and does and demonstrates will of course move it. I think companies could do well to look at it holistically, because it's not just about reporting in order to for their brand and their reputation, and for raising funds. And raising funds is not just one green bond, but it's equity, bonds, bank loans. And now you interact with insurers, etc. They're all going to be looking at the longer term effects, because as regulators are moving in this direction, we can see that that's very clear. Even in Singapore, MAS has put out a consultation about guidance. It's a very small step, but still a first step. But anyway, so you can see that in the financing side of things, it's very clear that the only way it's going to move is up, as it were. And then on the business side, as Sally has already said, and the reports show, the analysis shows that it's whether it's integrated into their strategy as not two strategies, but one, that how it's almost, previously there was so much emphasis on up to the minute reporting and quarterly reporting because people were keeping things hidden, etc. So maybe we moved so much in that direction. Now we've got to examine the other side, which is the long term. So in a sense, you actually have to do both. It doesn't mean that you have one at the expense of the other, but you've got to look short term because it's immediate and that's what's going to hit the market. And that's what happens the next day. But you also have to look long term because of the implications of the investments and the cash flows and all the planning that takes place. And if you're in any of the industries like the energy, in utilities, in infrastructure, which lasts 30 years and 50 years, you have to. It's part of the business. And so I think people are used to doing scenarios. They're not used to doing scenarios about climate. And so I think the more information gets into that area and the more capabilities are developed, more science gets into it, then I think that we are on a better footing because it will become more common knowledge and then gets embedded into all that investors do and markets do.
Well said, Nansim. So to summarize from both Sally and Nansim, is really TCFD benefit to companies. Is really it helps. It's a catalyst for the mindset change for things which are more important on a holistic basis rather than just climate-related change. And with that, maybe Sally, we can come back to you. What are you seeing on the ground? I mean, Erica presented some stats on the findings of research on TCFD, on sustainability. What are your views? Are we getting traction on the ground in the UK?
Absolutely, Wanchan. Thanks for that. As you said, Erica mentioned some of our key findings from the research already. So overall, we've seen a significant step change in terms of adoption of TCFD, but also quite a few gaps in terms of meaningful disclosures. And I think it's picking up on what Lim Sim said. This is not an easy thing. So although we're getting a lot more commitment from companies, there is a lot of work to be done behind this. So we've seen a lot of progress across a lot of areas, but what I thought might be interesting, really picking up on the evolution that Joanne shared at the beginning in that slide in terms of the sustainability evolution, I thought I would compare what we're seeing around TCFD in that way. And in terms of in the UK and the FTSE 100 that we looked at, we found that there are really four main categories of companies, and they're split about a quarter of the FTSE fall into each of these categories. So I'll start from the very bottom. So we saw beginners, is what we've called them, with about a number of companies, as I said, about 25%, with very limited disclosure against the 11 TCFD recommendations. No specific reference really to climate change at all in their reporting, and specifically no reference to TCFD. Usually these companies are reporting on a couple of the recommendations around scope 1 and scope 2, but that's usually compliance driven rather than strategically driven, okay? So that for those, companies that's not really on the map at all. The next step up is what we're calling low level or intermediate, where we see companies taking small steps on the journey. So we're seeing, again, they're starting to move beyond compliance to operational integration. So addressing some of these things, and they have limited to moderate disclosures against the TCFD recommendations, sort of 4 or 5 out of the 11. They're generally focused on, again, a lot of the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, limited information on risk and governance, but there are some attempts. And what we're finding is these companies are beginning to commit, because what we're seeing is they're actually mentioning climate change as an issue in their leadership statements. So they are addressing that it is an issue that they need to grapple with. And I think that's an important small step, but a big one in a lot of ways. So it is onto the agenda. The next stage up really from that is where we are seeing companies take much larger steps towards integration. So they're evolving to be more strategic in their approach. So they've started at a very operational level. These companies are doing moderate disclosure against the recommendations. And what we're seeing though is a commitment, usually in the leadership statements, a commitment to actually say, we're reporting on TCFD. So as Lynn said, that's a big step, I think, to actually publicly disclose that one is reporting on it. So they're firmly making a commitment towards it, or acknowledging that they need to. As Erica showed in our stats, we had a big jump last year from 39 companies out of the 100 to 67 actually acknowledging TCFD and referencing that. So I think that's a good first step. What we're seeing in terms of reporting though is it's still very siloed. Most of it is still in the sustainability section, which gives us the sense that it's not really being seen as a business critical issue yet. We're still thinking about it in a very siloed way as a sustainability strategy and a sustainability approach rather than a business imperative. The next stage up is, I think, those that are moving towards full integration, okay? And we are very encouraged by this lot. Again, this is about a quarter of the FTSE, much more strategically driven. These companies are disclosing much fuller around the recommendations and specifically reporting against the 4 pillars of TCFD: governance, strategy, risk, and metrics and targets, okay? Whereas in a lot of the other groups I've gone through, they may be reporting against a few of those different pillars, but not all of them. What we're also beginning to see as companies integrate this more into their reporting, we're finding that as they get more mature in their approaches and their development, and as Limson said, in terms of scenario analysis and the detail required from that, we're finding them covering a lot of that in the annual report, but also actually beginning to produce separate TCFD reports or supplemental TCFD reports with greater information in them. So not all of that detail is in the annual report, but those things are very closely cross-referenced. And even with these companies, we're seeing them as well be very consistent about the way that they're approaching and begin to communicate on their websites as well. So really taking a big step forward. So those are the 4 stages that we're seeing. And really, I think that's the evolution of the journey. And I think that it isn't easy, and it is a journey. And I think, like Linson said, we need to just encourage companies to get started thinking about these things. I think that's very important.
And as a follow-up question, Sally, thanks for that. Are you able to distinguish those who are in the more integrated reporting stage? Are these companies the ones that generally do well in terms of their performance, market cap, business profitability?
It's a really good question. I mean, we haven't analyzed that in as much detail. Maybe that's another a research piece that we do know. But I think that those that sit in the top category would be those that we recognize and we work with in terms of understanding the importance of these broader sustainability non-financial issues to long-term performance. I think that is very apparent. So they've embraced this as a strategic issue among other issues. So it's not just climate. They're usually inevitably thinking about the impact of, you know, ESG on the long-term performance of their business. And I think that's I would say the trend that we're seeing there. And also these companies, it's very linked up to their overarching strategy, and they're the ones that tend to see this and position this not just as a risk mitigation exercise, but an opportunity for future development and transition into a new world.
Thanks, Sally. Well said. Lindsay, over to you before we come to our Christmas wish. What's the inside track on TCFD? Have you been speaking to Michael Bloomberg recently?
No, but we've been doing a lot of work via webinar, via web connections, and we have to gather people from, you know, various time zones. So it's not very easy. It's usually around this time or and later.
Okay.
But I think that, to be fair, I have to tell you, we were extended long beyond what we thought our job was done in 2017. But then they said, no, I think you better stay around to see it through and see whether what you recommended made sense or whether, you know, the market didn't want it at all, and so on. So this year, what we've been working on is some additional help, additional guidance, if you like, for adopting the various recommendations under those 11 asks, the 11 boxes in that single table, and 4 under the 4 governance strategy, integrating into risk management and the metrics and targets. So there will be more on that, on integrating risk, climate change into risk. I think that was felt after some looking into the market that there might be some difficulties to get into the area. So helps producing something helpful from companies and from advisors who work on this. So certain areas like that, like you know, the resilience in the long term. So on the scenarios, so there will be something on scenarios, and the areas which are important, and that will come out very soon, in a few months' time. So it'll help companies to implement, and that's the idea. We still feel that the original purpose is relevant, that the recommendations are relevant. In fact, somehow people use it as like a framework to talk about risks and talk about you know, opportunities, which is nice. And so in that case, we should help it along. And so people were willing to actually get together and do the work. And if I might be permitted a little joke, I mean, where else? You know, you have to appreciate this, because where else do you get competitors to get together and produce a single document, a recommendation? It must be so important that they'll think the differences, get together and do it. So if I were you, watch out for it and make use of it. Really, it is the best efforts, and trying to advance understanding and make it easier for people to get into the area. And so maybe when you next do your survey, you know, the numbers will be really high, and that will be nice. It will be nice for all of us. That's what we're looking at. I think the other thing is that various groups have taken up the TCFD recommendations and worked on it, like TPI, you know, the Transition Pathway Initiative, where they took it further. And so that helps to bring it into practice, as it were. Then there's PRI, which has required their sign-ups, their members to do TCFD reporting, which is coming up, I believe, very soon. And so I think there will be something there. And so I think all these other efforts, there's even a new one I heard, Net Zero Asset Owners Association. Well, that's got Z's in it. But, you know, add to your alphabet soup, Wanchen. But it does mean that people are serious, and that other groups are producing helpful material and extending the capability, and that on the other side, the asset owner's side, there's action looking at how to make use of and to encourage more of these, you know, decision useful disclosures, as we say. So I think it is moving, and we just need to encourage it in our part of the world as well. I think the Japanese companies have had big number have signed up as supporters of TCFD, so one should see more coming out there.
Very heartwarming, Lensim. I feel like breaking out in "We Are the World" song soon.
just do it like Nike.
With that, we are just crossed 8 p.m. Sally, over to you. The Christmas wish for TCFD or Christmas wish in general. What's your wish for us this evening before we sign off?
Okay, look, my wish is I would like people to see this, particularly corporates, as an opportunity to better prepare themselves for the long term. I think it's really important that we focus on it as an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity to get these issues onto the boardroom agenda. Yeah, not just climate, but other sustainability issues. I think it's an opportunity to galvanize people internally around a common cause and understanding and greater alignment across the organization. I also think we have to ensure that we don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. I think it's really important to just get started, as Linson was saying. Few organizations have everything that they need in the first year, but get started on the issues that you can tackle and develop a longer term plan to tackle those things. And I think just education and collaboration are my two final points. As Limson was saying, I welcome the guidance. There's lots of great guidance out there. There's lots of organizations like the Chapter Zero initiative, which is focused on NEDs, which I know is coming out of WEF. I know they've got chapters around the world, which provides tools and questions boards should be considering around these issues. There's Accounting for Sustainability that has a CFO network that's very focused on helping integration. And so I think that idea of collaborating and learning from others, not just internally, but externally, about what others are doing. People are very open to sharing their experiences, and I think one should, take advantage of that and reach out and get involved in some of these networks, or reach out and talk to other people. So use it as an opportunity is my Christmas wish rather than an obligation.
Well said, Sally. Santa Claus will be happy with you. And Linsim, what's your Christmas wish for us this evening?
Well, why don't I end this? At the beginning, I said that climate change was a major secular trend. And you remember, I don't know if you remember, in the bond markets, we used to say the trend is your friend. You can't disregard it because it'll be there, it'll happen. And if you actually pay attention, find out more, and make sure, see what is relevant and work on it, then I think there will be gain there. And so I think that would be in line with what TCFD would like.
The trend is a friend.
And it's the climate change and sustainability trend.
Okay. Yes. And just on that, I think Mark Carney's quote was, we can't self-isolate from climate change. And I think that rings very true to what you're saying. So we better deal with it.
Okay. Joanne and Erica, your Christmas wish?
I don't know. Nothing too different. But I was going to use that Mark Carney quote, Sally, but you took it from me first. It's the same, that we should probably see this as a bigger issue beyond just climate and keeping it siloed, and yeah, take it as an opportunity, really. Hopefully that TCFD framework is seen as a framework, a generalized framework to look at other sustainability topics. that would be it.
Thanks, Erica. And Joanne, you wrap up for us. What's your Christmas
Yeah,
wish?
I think the ladies have said it all so well. Take it as an opportunity, not an obligation. Yeah, and bring it to the very top levels of the organization, your board, the CEO. Be the champions for climate issues in your own organization.
Thanks, Joanne. And with that, thank you everybody for taking part in this webinar, the last webinar of the 8th series. I'd like to thank Sally, Len Sim, Joanne, and Erica for spending their time this evening with us and all the participants. Once again, this is the last of our 8-part series of trust webinars that we've been holding together in conjunction with the Working Capital co-working space provider that we've been working with them since April of this year. All the recordings will be available via the link that we just shared with you earlier today. But we'll be sending you a follow-up email to let you know once all 8 are loaded. The first 7 are already loaded on the Black Sun website. And with that, on behalf of the panelists and speakers, thank you everybody and have a good evening.
Thank you, Wanchan.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you, everybody.